Hello everyone, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. Welcome to this special episode, and we are going to be talking about whether Biden should have withdrawn last year. So the reason I'm talking about this now is it's because it's been a little over a year now since he withdrew from the race. And many people have already kind of reviewed this, but I've never done it here, and I kind of want to put my own spin on it. So for the first time ever on this show, there's going to be some images for you to look at. If you're just listening, then I will describe them as best I can, what is going on screen. It's going to be nothing crazy, just a few graphics. So let's get right into it. So I will get this out of the way. If you want the short answer and you want to get out of here, the short answer is going to be yes. He did make the right choice to leave the race. And we are going to analyze polling in different states as well as the national picture as well. Well, actually, we're only going to look at the national picture. If you're interested in looking at the individual states, then I will kind of just briefly explain, and the story is very much the same all over. And if you want to look into that, I will suggest that you do that on your own. So we're going to talk about what we knew prior to July 21st, because it's very easy to look back on the past and say, oh, well, it was obvious when it wasn't. So we're going to look at what we knew before then and what we knew after. And July 21st, of course, was the day that he withdrew from the race. So I'm going to put all the sources in the description. Most of it is polling aggregators from Wikipedia. That will be in the description for you to look at yourself. So first, let's build the story here. Let's go all the way back to 2021, because that's really where our story begins. Gallup, which is a reliable pollster, had President Biden's approval rating in January 2021 at 57%, and it never went higher than that. And it really tumbled over the summer as the honeymoon phase wore off and the war in Afghanistan ended in disaster. And it fell to 43% by September. And by the way, I turned on Biden pretty much right before it went to crap. Then, basically after that, Gallup never showed Biden going above 44%, except for a brief period after he dropped out. And 44% is kind of, like, it's not great, but it's not terrible either. Once you get below that, that's not good. So in July 2024, it was at 36%. It was abysmal. And that's lower than Trump was when he was voted out in 2020. So that was a bad sign. Now, if you've been asleep for the last 4 years and you wonder why Biden became so unpopular, let me kind of answer that for you. This is from exit poll data from CNN, and this was done on election day. So we didn't know this. We didn't have this polling on the day that he dropped out. But we did kind of know that these were going to be the big issues. So this had over 20,000 respondents. That is a very high sample size. And exit poll data was asked a few of these questions. We'll run through them really quick. Families' financial situation today, only 24% of Americans said it was better than off than 4 years ago. 29% said it was about the same. 47%, almost a majority, said it was worse off than it was 4 years ago. The condition of the nation's economy, 5% said it was excellent, 27% said it was good, 35% said it was not so good, and 33% said it was poor. So a majority of the country, 35 plus 33 would be 68, and they said that the state of the nation's economy was poor. So a majority of the country thought, the vast majority, over 2/3 of the country, said that the nation was doing poorly. And it will not shock you that most of the people who said the economy was doing good or excellent voted entirely for Harris, and those who said it was doing poorly voted for Trump. And party identification, 31% said Democrat, 35% said Republican, and 34% said independent. So Democrats were down 4% on actual voters who showed out to the polls, which we know that does sort of make sense because Biden got several million more votes than Kamala Harris did. So that kind of goes along with the story that Democrats just didn't turn out. And down 4% is not a huge deal if you're broadly popular with independents. But if you're unpopular with independents and you can't turn out your base, that's lethal. You're not going to win. And that's a huge problem. People also said Kamala could just turn out the base. That's what some of my friends, pro-Kamala friends, were saying. And as we know, that did not happen. And the last thing, the last question I want to highlight, and were asked a whole bunch of different questions, so I will highly recommend you go take a look at that. Who do you trust to handle more on immigration? 53% said Trump, 44% said Kamala Harris. So the picture I'm building here is the administration was deeply unpopular on the economy and on immigration, and Democrats were not turning out. So let's go to June 2024, so 13 months ago. Biden was ahead in the polls, but he was not ahead in all of them. He was only ahead in some of them. So the Biden camp thought, okay, we can turn this around pretty quickly. There's no problem here. That's probably why they challenged Trump to a debate, because they believed that they could wound Trump early and they could pull ahead in the polls. And another reason, and this is probably the more likely one, is that usually the first debate for a sitting president is pretty bad. It happened with Obama and Trump, so they were thinking if we get this out of the way quickly before the convention, the Democratic convention, and we'll cover that up, and then we can move past it to the second debate in September, which usually goes better for the sitting president. In the past, Democrats needed to lead by no less than 2% to win the popular vote. To be comfortable, it needed to be at least 3. So if it's between 2 and 3, it's a close race, a toss-up. In the last election, the one that we're talking about, 2024, it was probably more likely 1%, because Trump was always going to pull more votes from states that he was either going to win handsomely. This would be states in the South or in the Rocky Mountains, or it was going to be states he had no chance of winning, like New Mexico, New Jersey, Illinois, New York, California. Of course, we didn't know exactly how that was going to be at the time. Nobody knows whether 1% lead is needed by the Democrats or 2%. So going into the election, I was still thinking 2 to 3%. However, we did know that he definitely needed to lead in order to have a decent shot at winning. He had to have +1, at least, no less than that. And we know almost no polls after that debate showed him leading. And if you're interested in this, I recommend you check out our episode. We made 2 from October and November, one before and one after the election. I recorded with my friend Joe about the Democrats, and that is on all the platforms that we support. So then there was the debate. Hopefully, I don't need to say any more here. Then Biden immediately began to sink in the polls. As you can see on the list of polls, it goes from kind of mixed picture to he's down. And out of all the polls here on Wikipedia, only 4 show Biden with the lead, each with 2 points or less, which likely would not have been enough, and if it had been, it would have been barely enough. Some polls showed Trump with a 6 or 7 point lead, and that would have been landslide territory, at least in our current climate. Some polls were almost close to double digits, which was quite astounding at the time. As we moved into July, talks among the highest orders of the Democratic Party were talking about replacing Biden. Now, you might wonder, why didn't they just kick Biden out right away? They could have just done it like a couple of days after debate, get rid of him, and then that would have been the end. Except it was not that it was not that simple. Number one, Biden was legally the nominee. He had enough delegates to win the party's nomination without a doubt. He faced no major challenger in the primary, so there wasn't really another figure to rally around. There was Kamala Harris, as we're going to talk about, but here was the problem, and you're going to look at this in just a little bit. There was the polling that was done between Harris and Trump went as far back as 2021, because many people, including me, expected Harris to be a major figure for the party's nomination. Except when you pose it to voters, most voters said they did not like Kamala Harris compared to Donald Trump. Not a single poll in the year 2023 showed Kamala ahead of Donald Trump. And in 2024, before the election, it was a little bit more mixed, but it still was not that strong. And it was also a hypothetical question as opposed to a real question. And when you present voters with a hypothetical question, they might be thinking about it differently. And also, considering Kamala in this polling was not the actual nominee for president, and not a lot of people actually knew about her. So they kind of had to fill in the gaps, which, in my opinion, makes Kamala actually, in those bad polls, appear better than she actually would have been. As I said, in 2023, Kamala did not lead in a single poll, and Trump led by high single digits. And polling before the debate did show a slight narrowing, I did mention that, but it was still not good enough, because the swap from Biden to Harris was going to be messy, so they would have to know, Democrats would have to know that it would definitely be better. Then after the debate, the media started floating Harris, and she started to take a narrow lead in the polls. However, it was not more than 2 or 3 points, which meant, as I said, a switch was going to be risky. So the thinking of Team Biden was, Kamala is not a threat because she doesn't have a strong lead in the polls. And here's the thing, I agreed with them. And I believe I said on the show at the time, I said switching to Kamala Harris would not make a lot of sense because she had even lower polling than Biden. Her approval rating was even lower. And in June and early July, I said this on the show, I said Kamala was definitely not going to be better. However, Biden was doing really badly. Once we got to the middle and end of July, he was doing bad. In Arizona, Trump had a 6-point lead over Biden. In Nevada, Trump had a 6-point lead. In Wisconsin, Trump had a 3-point lead, technically within the margin of error. Michigan was 2.1%, partly because Trump also fell in the polls as well. Pennsylvania was a 4.5-point lead. North Carolina was 5.5 points. And Georgia was a 4-point lead. And here's the thing about the polls. We will never know what would have happened if Biden had stayed in the race. And that would have been fascinating, but instead I like to look at the direction of the polls and where things are going. He was dropping, and we knew that. And I assume he would have dropped even further. And at the very least, the map we saw in November would have been replicated in this alternate universe where Biden is the Democratic nominee. That is the best thing that we can say. In reality, it might have been way worse. Minnesota might have been on the table, maybe Virginia, New Hampshire, Maine, New Jersey, and probably because it was so close. And Democratic turnout would have been very low. Since Biden was essentially senile, anybody who doesn't believe that, I cannot take you seriously. The chances of him going out and making his case successfully would have also failed. Because the day before he dropped out, July 20th, just 23% of the country believed that we were on the right track. I was stunned. And we learned that it never got any better than that. It was 27% on election day. So it seemed to me, and I assume Democrats at the time, that the more voters saw of Biden, the less they liked him. And that was the problem. He was already behind, so he couldn't do the basement thing again. That was not going to work. He needed to put himself out there, but every time he did that, he made it worse. So they dumped him. It was essentially a coup. So that's everything we knew up to a year ago. And then what happened next? So Kamala stepped in, and her approval rating jumped. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen it before. Gallup did a poll in December of 2023, and her approval rating was at 40%, which was right around where Biden was. In August 2024, it was 47%, which was higher than Trump's. So there was a while there where it looked like she would actually win. And that's what made me think she had a real shot. She maintained this approval too. She dropped to 44% in September in September, and then rose to 45% in October. As for Trump v. Harris, nearly every poll showed Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump. And RFK Jr. was in the race until August, and he endorsed Trump, but still she had a large lead in the polls. In some of the polls anyway. So mid-August rolls through, she's nominated, things go perfectly, it's smooth, there's no contest at the convention, and she's nominated, and we go into September, and she has a softer but still lead. She has a lead in the polls. In the first debate on September 10th, and that was actually the second debate, which turned out to be the last debate. I don't think that really changed much, and I said that at the time. I reviewed it and everything. Her poll lead did widen a little bit, and as we rolled through October, it softened a bit again, and it really looked like Harris was going to win. Mid-October, it became closer, just after the infamous statement on The View, where she said nothing came to mind when it came to possibly, if she had the chance to do the last 4 years over again. She said she wouldn't, and I'll tell you, this as a swing voter really irritated me, and that was a huge blunder, because as I pointed out, the administration was as popular as a piece of dog poop on the sidewalk that you just walked through. So as we get into late October, the polls tightened again, and Harris was only 1 to 2 points ahead on average. A couple of polls showed her with 3 to 4, as you can see on screen. And the final poll says she was up between 1 and 4%. A couple had it tied with Trump, maybe up 1 or 2 as well, but most of them had her up between 1 and 4%. So going into election day, it was anyone's guess who was going to win. then obviously she lost. She lost by 1.5%, and Trump overperformed the polls by 2 to 3%, depending on the pollster. A few did say he was ahead. And he won he did win every swing state. And that's really telling because, as I said earlier, she had 6 million less votes than Biden did, while Trump had an extra 3 million. So did those 3 million votes switch from Biden to Trump? Probably not. I'm assuming some of them did, maybe up to 1 million, maybe a little bit more. But I'm assuming a lot of Democrat votes did not come out. And then Trump probably, because he did so well with young people, a lot of people aged into the electorate, which is what I would expect. And this is not a surprise looking back. The fact that Trump won, it almost seems obvious. But as I said, as I've said before, and I'm going to keep saying for the rest of the show until the show ends, whenever that happens, that it was not obvious at the time. It's always obvious looking back. And that's something I assumed at the time as well. I said, whoever wins, it's going to be obvious when we look back. So you might wonder about Kamala's strong suit. What was her strong suit? Her strong suit was abortion and democracy. More specifically, it was abortion. So people who said that abortion should be legal in all cases, 33% of the total, 88% of them voted for Kamala. And unlike in 2022, the people who mostly supported abortion, the people in most cases, did not entirely vote Democrat. 33% of them said that abortion should be legal in most cases. It was dead even between Trump and Harris. So that showed that Trump's position on abortion was highly effective. It essentially neutralized the Democrats' advantage. And for Harris, her relentless pushing of abortion, which I think is kind of a stupid issue to be constantly pushing, because to half the electorate, including me, that doesn't matter. Like abortion policy has very little effect on me. And that was a huge problem. And she was unable to convert those pro-choice supporters into voters. So in retrospect, considering how unpopular the administration was, and the fact that governments fell across the world in 2024, in the UK, in South Africa, in Japan, in India, and France, governments suffered losses in India, but they still held on. And if she had won, it would have been narrow and without a strong mandate to govern our country. So for Harris, it was right for her to step in, even if she didn't end up winning. In the end, though, if I was Kamala Harris, I would not have done that. I think that would have been a very bad idea because her career is basically over. If she had stepped aside, she had been Biden's vice president. Yeah, Democrats, as I will talk about in just a moment, would have lost handsomely, but she could still, for the most part, rub her hands clean of it. Instead, she took the poison chalice, and now her career is dead. It's because Democrats' turnout, as I said, dropped across the country. Because of that, Democrats running in state and local races would have been affected as well. And most people, they only care about the president, which is fair. That makes sense, and I understand, and that was how I was for a long time. If people don't want to vote for president, unless they have a personal connection to their senator, their representative, or their local official, which most people don't, it's really hard to get people to come out to vote, especially people who are independent or people who only vote like every other election. It's very hard to get people to do that, especially when your candidate is senile. And the effects of losing down ballot races can last for years, if not a decade or longer. Without getting into it too much, because most of you probably don't care, Republicans did very well in 2010 under Obama's first term. They won several state legislatures and governor's offices. Then, with redistricting, they redrew the maps to give themselves an advantage. Democrats do this too sometimes. It's called gerrymandering. It's not. It's unfortunately not illegal, and these maps stayed with us until the end of 2022, and that was 12 years later. So and in some ways, we are still living with the consequences of that 2010 midterm wave, even though the maps have changed since then. We're still living with those consequences. And the same thing would have happened here. If Democrats had lost really badly in 2024, which was the most likely outcome with Biden as on the ticket, at the very least, the senators elected in 2024 would have been in office until 2030. The state legislatures, I know here in Pennsylvania, the Democrats held on to the state house. I can pretty much guarantee you that the state house would have flipped to Republicans, and that probably would have happened across the country. Several Democratic although not that many governors were up for re-election, but I wouldn't have been surprised if North Carolina would have been a little bit closer. It probably wouldn't have been that close because the Republicans' nominee was literally a Nazi. He was a black Nazi. So I don't know about that, but some of those elections would have been a lot closer. Like I would have said, the senators in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and Nevada would have probably lost their seats, and Democrats would have been up for a tough fight in Arizona. But considering their candidate was covered in voter repellent, that's the nicest thing I can say. Republicans might have had 56 seats. Think about all that's happened in the last few months. The reason there has been so much gridlock and chaos is because of the narrow majorities. If Biden had stayed in and Democratic turnout plunged even lower than it did in our timeline, then it might have actually been even worse. Like there would be a lot more legislation moving through the House, moving through Congress. So. And it would have also made retaking the Senate in 2026 and maybe even 2028 impossible. So as for the House, nobody knows what would have happened there. I would have imagined they would have gained at least 10 or maybe 20 more seats than they actually did. And Democrats probably don't even want to think about that. So once again, hopefully this wasn't too confusing, he made the right choice to leave the race. In fact, he should have left in 2023 or never even joined to begin with. And that was something that when he announced that he was running again, I was kind of surprised because I remember talking to Dylan, who I've had on this show before. I said, Biden is not going to make it until the end of his second term. He is not going to walk out of the White House in January 2029. He's either going to lose or he's going to die. And I knew that back then. And while we'll never know if he would have died in office, we know that he is not going to walk out of the White House in 4 years because he wasn't reelected. So that is it for this episode. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm not exactly sure when this is going to come out. That's why I didn't talk about this in the regular episode. And we will be back next week, whenever that is. So thank you for joining me and have a great week. Bye-bye.